I would like to go back in time to share the story behind my name, to connect everyone with the situation in Afghanistan and the wider world. My father was only a teenager in 1979 when he was arrested by the former Soviet Union-backed Afghan government. His only crime was that he was intelligent and an activist. He was arrested from the class, taken to the provincial prison, and later to the most notorious and largest prison in Afghanistan called Policharkhi. His fate would have ended up like the 5,000 other prisoners who got killed by the regime from that prison, if only he didn't survive and escape the prison. Famed as the free man, even within people who did not know him as a person, he chose free, which translates into Azad, as his last name. For my first name, my grandfather's first visit to the capital of the country, Afghanistan, played a key role during President Najeeb Azad's time. Back then, despite all of the shortcomings, Afghanistan had a stronger economy, a better outlook towards the future. We even had electric buses in a country where ordinary citizens do not have electricity for their household use. Najeeb, as a word, caused my grandfather's attention, and also because of its meaning in Arabic, which means generous and noble. It was when I was born that my grandfather got the perfect opportunity to use his rights as the oldest family member to name me, and he named me Najeeb. It was not soon after I was born that the Taliban took over and hanged President Najibullah and his brother on a traffic light in Kabul. My story and the story of my country is deeply linked in education, schools, and textbooks. In 1979, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, University of Nebraska in the US received a grant of $51 million from United States Agency for International Development. With this grant, millions of textbooks were published and distributed in Afghanistan. In these textbooks, children in grade 1 learned counting by counting grenades, guns, bullets, and rockets. They learned the alphabets, where the letter J did not stand for Jij in Dutch or jar in English, but rather J stood for jihad. Jihad, that is, must against the infidels. And the letter T did not stand for train, but rather stood for tufang, which means gun in Dari. Gun that must be taken to conduct jihad against the infidels. And these examples became more advanced in higher classes. In grade 3, children would learn more detailed description about jihad, and they would learn more multiplication methods using bullets. These books were studied in Afghan schools for more than 2 generations, from the early 1980s till the late 2000s. And according to the Washington Post report, these books may have been used till 2014. Obviously, the effect of these books on many generations of Afghans are beyond imagination. But the textbooks achieved what was wanted of them: to weaken the Soviet military, the Soviet economy, and ultimately lead to the fall of the Soviet Union, and later the fall of the Berlin Wall. Unfortunately, due to these textbooks, the situation in Afghanistan did not change positively. The situation in Afghanistan deteriorated. It gave rise to an extremist group called the Taliban. The Taliban, which means students in Arabic, students of the Islamic madrasas. These textbooks also touched my life when I was a refugee in Pakistan. We had no other access to other textbooks but these. My family had to flee the same Taliban people are fleeing now at the end of 1990s because of the fear of persecution. We belong to an ethnic group, the Hazaras, which are the 3rd ethnic minority group in Afghanistan. We are from the Shia sect of Islam and not the Sunni. And we are pretty much easily recognizable in Afghanistan due to our facial features. Due to the fear of persecution, our family had to leave Afghanistan, like millions of other families. While driving towards the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, our family was stressed and worried. And they were all silent, driving towards the border, thinking if they will manage to safely cross the border. I was only 6 or 7, so I had no idea what was happening. So I did what a child would do best when their family is stressed and silent. I slept. But that nap would have changed my life if my family did not come back after minutes of forgetting me in the car due to the chaotic situation in the border. I would have been a completely different person now, because that part of the border has a huge concentration of extremism and such Islamic extremist madrasas. My story is an example of how positive collaboration through global foreign policies can shape things differently and positively. I did my school partly in a UNHCR-funded school in Pakistan. Later continued my education in a Japanese-funded charity school in Pakistan. Did my bachelor's in India through an Indian scholarship, and did my master's in Europe through a European Commission scholarship as the first person from Afghanistan to do my master's in joint European Masters in Education Policies for Global Development. But stories like mine from Afghanistan are pretty rare. There are thousands of Islamic madrasas where more than thousands and thousands of children are still, right now, getting the education, being taught extremism, and these Islamic madrasas are funded through unknown funding mechanisms that keep producing a sustainable production line of terrorism. Afghanistan's history has been intertwined with war and conflict. 9/11 had a major role in shaping the current situation. A horrific attack that was planned by Al-Qaeda, who were given homage in Afghanistan by the Taliban. Despite all of the controversies behind the responsible members behind 9/11, Al-Qaeda was a non-Afghan terrorist group whose leader was killed in Pakistan and not Afghanistan. And to summarize the whole situation, war on terror was fought because of a person from country A killed in country B while the war was fought in country C, Afghanistan. And now Afghans are seeking refuge in any other country possible except Afghanistan. Was the war on terror in Afghanistan necessary? Nearly $3 trillion were spent. 46,000 ordinary civilians got killed. A nation was promised that democracy will change their lives, while at the same time there were drone strikes that were controlled by pilots outside Afghanistan that killed on average 100 to 500 ordinary civilians every year from 2006 till 2020. A nation was promised prosperity and state building and democracy, but at the end of the day, it was all left on one side, and the countries who promised them left irresponsibly, left them in the hands of an extremist group called the Taliban, which was formerly called the Mujahideen during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The main reason the war on terror started in Afghanistan was that the Western interests are in danger because of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, the two terrorist groups. Right now, there are 13 terrorist groups in Afghanistan. What about the Western interests now? Does 13 terrorist groups not pose more threat than 2 terrorist groups? Or did Afghanistan just decide to move to Mars and does not exist on this planet anymore? As part of the global war on terror, nearly 1 million ordinary civilians have been killed. And these are just direct cost of war, the indirect cost of injuries, the pain and mental health issue and PTSD and all of these issues that millions or thousands of people are probably suffering now as part of it, and how we as societies have to bear the problems that will be coming along as part of the global war on terror. $8 trillion was spent in global war on terror by the United States government only, out of which 2.3 trillion was spent in Afghanistan, which is roughly $300 million per day spent in war on terror in Afghanistan. And based on the current US population estimates of 330 million people, it is nearly $1 from every American ordinary citizen that has gone to war in Afghanistan in the past 20 years. What would have happened if we spent this energy and resource on building peace and prosperity and not war and terror? It sometimes makes me think if this was a war on terror or a war for terror. If you compare the Marshall Plan reconstruction project cost and the cost of reconstruction in Afghanistan, the cost in Afghanistan surpassed the Marshall Plan reconstruction cost in 2017. But the two situations are completely uncomparable because Marshall Plan helped build entire Europe after World War II. But Afghanistan is destroyed. After 20 years of global war on terror, this is the map of the world based on the Global Terrorism Index 2022. These are the terrorist incidents around the world in 2021. You may think that this must not have been estimated, but it was. In an interview in 1998, former National Security Advisor of President Carter, during whose time the textbook project happened, defended the project, saying, what was more important in the view of world history? The possible creation of an armed radical Islamic movement or the fall of Soviet Empire, a few stirred up Muslims, or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War. We live in a very different world now. We are more connected than ever in the history of humanity. We are connected through foreign policies, international trade, social media, and also through global issues that we face together as a humanity, like terrorism, climate change, unemployment, rise of AI. And if we think of one actor that plays a key role in shaping the solution for these global issues we face, it is our governments. And in democratically elected governments, it is us ordinary civilians who are in the core decision-making process of electing our governments to be our voice in both domestic and foreign arena. But how often do we question our governments in terms of their foreign policies? How much did we question our governments in the war on terror in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in the conflict in Syria, in Palestine, in Israel? How often do we actually even question our governments in domestic policies like climate change, or rise of AI, or unemployment, or the housing crisis in the Netherlands? Despite how connected we are, unfortunately, we are very much disconnected as well, through technology, social media algorithms, and website cookies. And this disconnection may trigger our minds, where one would be like, well, I have a lot of personal issues in my life. I can not help the world with solving global issues. A valid question, but in order to find an answer, one first needs to educate themselves about the root causes of these global issues and its direct or indirect effects on every individual on this planet. We are connected through global issues like the pandemic, terrorism, climate change. These global issues does not recognize any borders. The pandemic did not recognize any border. Climate change does not require a visa to enter a new territory. And terrorism does not recognize any border. Its ripple effect is going to be seen across the world through either terrorist attacks or through other social issues. Your contribution does not necessarily have to be through tangible actions like organizing a protest or organizing a campaign. It can also be through intangible actions like sharing a post on social media before clicking on the share button to think if your post is inclusive enough. If it is covering the issue that you're addressing in an inclusive way. If you're talking about a conflict, make sure you're handling or talking about a conflict in a global scale and not only in your immediate vicinity. If you're talking about any issue, please think of the bigger picture. Sometimes it does not even require any action from our side. It just needs a moment of thought. Next time you see that amazingly looking outfit for a ceremony, think of what we human beings have done with the planet. We only constitute 0.01% of life on this planet. But we have caused destruction of 80% of wild mammals and mass extinction of 30,000 species every year, which is 3 species per hour. Coming back to the situation in Afghanistan, the country is back to point zero. According to the recent UNHCR report, Afghanistan is one of the biggest displacement crises in the world. More than half of the population, 23 million people, are in acute food insecurity threat. More than 1 million children are in severe threat of malnourishment. Girls are not allowed to continue secondary education anymore. Women are not allowed to go out alone without a male companion. The country is run by an all-inclusive Taliban cabinet. 2 days ago, 2 terrorist attacks happened on education centers in Kabul, in a Hazara-dominated area. Ethnic minority groups are still being persecuted. Today, there were 4 attacks that happened around the country. The country is indeed back to the era of the Taliban at the end of 1990s. My question to you is, how would you, as ordinary citizens from your different countries, build a bridge between yourself and the wider world? This was my story and the story of my country, where there were bits and pieces of ordinary civilians from across the world and foreign policies of governments from across the world that shaped me as a person and my country as a country. I'd like to end my talk with a poem from Sadi, which says, بنی آدم اعضای یکدیگرند که در آفرینش ز یک گوهرند چو عضوی به درد آورد روزگار دیگر عضوها را نماند قرار تو که از محنتی دیگران بیغمی نشاید که نامت نهند آدمی. Thank you.